Welcome to another episode of Inspired Content with another novel reading week. This month's novel is The Gnomewrench in the Dwarfworks by Nick O'Donohoe. And it looks to be sort of like a World War II time period dealing with some fantasy elements. So I'm going to take a look at that and see what kinds of ideas it inspires, and I'll see you on the other side. The Gnomewrench in the Dwarfworks. I gotta say, when I started this, I had a little bit of a worry that this would be a little thick and hard to get through. The story started in a way that was not as immersive, and it was about a chapter and a half to 2 chapters in before I finally started to get into the flow of the characters. But after that, I would say this is definitely one of the better books I've read in a long time. There are sections of it where the author gets a little into the describing how the furnaces in a foundry work, and I think it could be glazed over a little, but it actually supplies the sort of mundane existence and keeping busy mindset of the main character. I just think it's you could write the story without it and just tell them that these things happened without going into the details of it, and you'd still get away with a certain amount of decent story. But that said, I would definitely say about a 7.3 out of a 7.5 is where I'd rate this. It's totally worth reading. I will also note that it appears to be a sequel, but not in the sense that you have to have read the previous ones. And I'm not sure how many they are. They're not marked as, the sequel to or anything like that. You don't need it, really, I don't think. But that being said, the author has 3 other books, and I don't know if they're a part of this setting or not. But they all have that kind of normal human from our history interacts with the mystical and magical world, which is hidden in secret to most people. And it's done really well in this. And I think the other thing I like about it is all the characters are complexly rich beings. They have those moments in social interactions where there is no course that doesn't leave somebody somewhat hurt, and there's no perfect way out, and it can ruin friendships and hurt people. And at the same time, he does a really good job of doing some appreciation of historical time frames. So it's definitely worth looking through for some of those aspects. And so let's get into the creative new ideas that you can take away from this. There's an aspect of this that's touched on a little bit where the main character is sort of in a marketing position, and he's confronted by some of the more mystical elements of society that he didn't know existed. So he solves a few problems to prove how he can be valuable to the community, and I think to me that suggests a story setting that would be fun to do is sort of an odd jobs person for the supernatural community, where somebody comes in with a problem of being supernatural lends some sort of complication in living their life in the world as it exists, and this person's supposed to do something to help resolve that inconvenience or problem. Expanding on this further, instead of having the hidden communities of supernaturals, have it be the mystically different. Treat it sort of like the way we treat use it as a metaphor for the way we treat disability and handicap status in the United States or other countries, and how assistive technologies could be marketed, like scooters for those unable to walk great distances could be translated over into something similar for mermaids to navigate around the city. So it would be an enclosed, water-filled wheelchair or something. Do things like that for, the wheelchair ramps. Would you do ramps for centaurs? Horseshoe supply facilities for centaurs, or even some sort of foot protection for satyrs. So it's just kind of build markets around handicap assistance for the non-human. A trade bazaar for goods and services amongst the supernatural community. I mean, you've got to imagine that they've got to have some equivalent of their own Chinatown somewhere. And the business district of that region, and open markets in that area. But because they're supernatural, you're going to have very different things that could be sold and exchanged in those environments. Centaurs, who are an active part of the community, they're going to be living in cities, but they're going to be wanting food that are more fit for their systems than for human systems. I don't know if that requires large amounts of hay to mix in with their food. I don't know. World War II, or even World War I, or Korean War divisions of supernaturals in the military. I think a world in which actual historical military events occur, and so you have these wars and do like a historical piece, but change it in a way that the people in these settings include, the chaplain vampire, or the like a first aid, or a medic who's a centaur, reaching back into Chiron from mythology. And I'm always a huge fan of stories of changelings, and so I gotta wonder if you went back into the mode of the idea that people don't know these communities of supernaturals exist, and so they're sort of disconnected from them, but you connect with the old ideas of changelings as they would exist in mythology. Still have changelings in a more modern setting. You could also do it differently, or you could do it in the sense of the supernatural are publicly known, and as part of their communities they adopt people from orphanages and workhouses and take them in and make them part of the community. I mean, it's a little trickier with things like vampires and werewolves, whether or not you infect them with your affliction, but I think maybe expanding on those ideas a little bit, because I do like the idea of mystical beings adopting humans from orphanages, and at the same time humans maybe adopting some mystical beings whose families were lost in some calamity. And I think it would be a good metaphor for interracial adoption, and it would be a good discussion of different people with different needs, like disabled people in a household whose family is struggling to deal with their disabled needs. But at the same token, it would be kind of fun, magical, and mystical way of approaching topics of people with different needs and families who are different from themselves. This one's just pure fun. I would love to see a further extrapolation of how something like dwarves and elves, maybe even vampires, could be useful in the early stages of space exploration. I mean, a dwarven crafted rocket would be much more versatile and resilient to the struggles going into space, and the lightweight and sort of sturdiness and healthiness of dwarves and elves as astronauts. But also, this is a thought for me that really kind of struck me as interesting. What would be the challenges and advantages of having, say, vampires on the moon? I mean, if they're dead, they don't need to breathe, and they won't be horribly affected by the dangers of space. They could walk around on the moon without spacesuits. But the question then becomes, sunlight, is that an issue for them? And it's just like the possibilities and the, patching holes in the complications that were involved in the early space program by using partnerships with mystical beings to achieve these things. It just strikes me as totally interesting, and it would be an amazingly fun story to write. So, hopefully you got some inspiration for some of these. I know I'm definitely going to pursue some of these a bit further. Until next time, take care.